Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret, the Poet Laureate of Ridgefield. Welcome to the last, for now at least, in a series of themed poetry readings designed to encourage Ridgefielders to read, write, listen to, and enjoy more poetry. First of all, we have to express our deep gratitude to the Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center for welcoming us to make a home both indoors and out at this beautiful venue. Today we're indoors. And I hope you had the chance, everyone, to enjoy the garden, even though it was kind of a rainy afternoon and left the grass quite wet. Please be sure to help yourself on the table in the back to some literature about Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center, and also about their programs, and hopefully you'll consider becoming a member too. I'd also like to thank Ridgefield Library, whose generous support helps make this and many poetry events possible here in town. And please watch for upcoming fall and winter events. And if you'd like to receive advance notification, there's a sign-up sheet in the back table. And if you're a Facebook user, like the Ridgefield Poet Laureate page, and you'll have access to all kinds of poetry-related events and information, including a recording of this evening's program. Speaking of this evening's program, the theme is environmental awareness and activism this evening. Some of the poems you'll hear pay tribute to the beauty of our natural world, while others call for the need to take an immediate active role in offsetting the increasingly devastating effects of climate change. We've all seen it in the news, and the news just keeps getting more and more dire. A first-of-its-kind study of the impacts of climate change across generations, recently published in the journal Science, found that if the planet continues to warm at its current trajectory, the average 6-year-old will live through roughly 3 times as many climate disasters as someone born in 1960, like many of us. They will see twice as many wildfires, 1.7 times as many tropical cyclones, 3.4 times more river floods, 2.5 times more crop failures, and 2.3 times as many droughts. And the changes will be especially horrific in developing nations, places that contribute least to global warming. For instance, infants in sub-Saharan Africa are projected to live through 50 to 54 times as many heat waves as someone born in the pre-industrial era. So, clearly, in the words of climate scientist Kim Cobb of the Georgia Institute of Technology, the moral weight of this moment is almost unbearable. Tonight's reading is co-sponsored by the Ridgefield Action Committee for the Environment, better known as RACE, a volunteer-driven organization that promotes awareness, education, and action for the responsible use of energy, conservation of resources, and the reduction of waste. Please welcome Vincent Giordano to tell us more about RACE and its programs.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. So RACE serves an advisory capacity to the Ridgefield Board of Selectmen, and as Bob mentioned, we are an ad hoc volunteer group of Ridgefielders concerned about the environment and sufficiently motivated to do something about it. Most recently, we partnered with Eversource to promote their home energy audits. If you haven't done this, you really should, because you're paying for it every month in your bill. And these home energy audits will come to your home. They'll check on how well your home is insulated and sealed. They'll leave you with LED light bulbs. They'll actually install them many times in your own home, and you'll end up saving quite a bit of money. We also partner with the Ridgefield Library. We held a Zoom series on climate change, solar power, geothermal energy, heat pump technology, energy audits, and now EV charging, electric vehicle charging. In our next event, I've left a flyer on your chair. We're having a EV car show at the Knott Hill Brewery, and we're going to be presenting Knott Hill Brewery with the first ever Ridgefield Green Business Award. Knott Hill Brewery is the first and only Connecticut brewery that is solely on solar power. They pathway next to the beer garden, and they have LED partial lighting in the parking lot. So they've done quite a bit to be a green business. We'll have EV dealers, owners, charger company, Connecticut Green Bank, a solar company there, plus Ridgefield dignitaries. So you're welcome to join us and celebrate Knott Hill Brewery's award. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And now for this evening's poets. The Poet Laureate of Canton, Connecticut, David K. Leff, is an award-winning essayist and Pushcart Prize-nominated poet. In 2016 and 2017, David served as poet in residence for the New England National Scenic Trail, or NET, the first ever such designation for any of the country's 11 such trails established by an act of Congress. The author of 6 nonfiction books, 3 volumes of poetry, and 2 novels in verse. This may be old news because I know you just keep cranking them out there. David has read his work, given book talks, and lectured on literary, historic, and environmental topics throughout Connecticut and beyond. He recently co-edited New England Nature, an anthology of early environmental writing, and is in the process of editing Echoes from Walden, verse inspired by the life and work of Henry David Thoreau. And here's some wonderful local importance from David's very diverse biography. As the former Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, David helped advance the acquisition of Ridgefield's 460-acre Bennett Pond property, enabling the popular recreational area with its vast network of wonderful trails to be preserved in perpetuity as a Connecticut state park. So please welcome and thank David K. Leff.
Thank you very much, Clark, for that kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here and reading with my friend, Margaret Gibson, whose work I greatly admire. You're all in for a real treat. I always love coming to Ridgefield. It's an energizing place. You have a really vibrant Main Street, deep history, which Keeler Tavern represents. I love the cannonball embedded in the wall of the building from the Revolutionary War. Open space is just so choice here. Not only Bennett's Pond, Cethlo, Pierpont State Park. It's just a wonderful landscape. I can see why even 100 years ago that J. Alden Weir decided to settle in Branchville and paint. He was prescient, he knew what you had here, and it's even more valuable today as time goes on. With one exception, I'm going to read from tonight's theme of environmental action and a time of climate crisis, which I believe includes writing about the beauty of nature close to home. Because if we think of nature at home and our home as nature, we're more likely to act, to have the action that's in the theme of tonight's reading. Or, as Henry David Thoreau said, what good is a house if you don't have a decent planet to put it in? So, I'm going to begin with a poem called Skim Milk Sky, and you may remember this summer and then last September, with all the fires out west, the pallor that the air was full of soot and ash, and this is about that. There's one word in here you might not be familiar with, and that is a Pulaski. It's a firefighting tool. One end is an axe, the other end is a hoe. I used a Pulaski, more than 25 years ago when I was a wildland firefighter. One of my proudest possessions is my federal red card. And it was quite a thrill to be doing that kind of work. It was hard labor too. Skim Milk Sky, and it starts with an epigraph from, it's a headline from the New York Times. Historic wildfires rage in western states, and that was September 10, 2020. Beneath hazy skies tinged skin milk blue, I feel a pressure, a weight, where New England's endless azure September should lighten my steps. Weirdly visible, air is soot sludge from blazes, devouring California's homes and hillsides, the sun's eye clouded by a smoky cataract. A slight acrid scent brings me back to days cutting line with a Pulaski, spritzing hot spots from a backpack tank, old stumps burning like braziers, snags falling and splintering, foliage crackling like foil in long hours of sweat, heat, and adrenaline-rushed heartbeats. Having witnessed the savage hunger of flames, I envision charred wreckage and broken lives in these soft flannel skies. The sooty air filled with heaven's portion of forests reduced to ragged shadows. Time's gradual click plays tricks on human minds, and slow-paced climate change seems a future exceeding our grasp. I live in a digital age that scoffs at ancients who augured with meteor and eclipse, but by merely looking upward into a cloudless monotony of gray, I know we connect to California with every breath. So, with climate change and these fierce storms that have ravaged the country, everything from fire to flood to wind, increased hurricane activities, it reminds me of a condition my daughter has. She's bipolar, and thank goodness she's learned to deal with it. She's in her 30s. She's an excellent wedding photographer and a pharmacy technician, but when she was younger, her moods would swing so rapidly. It was quite frightening. There was a point, and I'm quite serious, when I didn't think she'd live to be 21. So I'm very grateful for what has transpired. But her condition reminds me of the condition that our planet is in right now. So, bipolar planet. From Arctic to Antarctic, this planet's infected with the same chaotic seesaw moods howling the souls of people I love. Crazed with atmospheric energy, record cloudbursts flood streets, hyperactive storms splinter trees and homes as hillside tsunamis of hellfire spawn new normals. Slowly, quietly, like the onset of deep sadness, glaciers melt to milky streams, calve and fragment, while elsewhere rain's silence drinks soils to dust. I depend on tailpipes and smokestacks that breathe heat and poison, anxiously inviting oceans to swallow solid ground with suicidal tides. In the sea's swelling calm, I see a mirrored face. We've become the weather. Climate is us, recreating Earth in our own fractious image. So I live in an old mill village, Collinsville, once the world's capital of edge tool manufacture, famous for axes and machetes. The first place of mass production of axes was like sliced bread. It was an amazing thing. The company's long gone out of business. But I live on a quarter-acre lot within view of Town Hall, and yet I have bears in my yard, porcupines, all sorts of creatures that weren't around when I was growing up, but are now. So there's, despite what we're doing to the planet, there is some healing going on. This is about a fox that inhabits my backyard on occasion. Fox. Watering my garden at 6:30, I watch Fox run up the driveway. Auburn coat, thick and glossy, fuzzy pennant of a tail. Fox scurries across the lawn, squeezes between rose bushes to a burrow beneath a stone wall. I've lived on this quarter acre in the village over 3 decades, But with senses sharpened by hunger and procreant urgency, Fox knows my plot better, assumes ownership by adverse possession of deliberate and awakened necessity. Late afternoon, I'd look out the window while vacuuming. Fox lounges on the lawn, rolls and slides like a dog, stops suddenly, scratches, pricks up ears, looks around, and resumes. Suddenly standing, a shake of the head ripples down body to tail. Science tells me of the habits and habitat, diet, mating, diagrams of internal organs and functions, but no necropsy or radio collar reveals Fox ferocity and feral self-possession, and I long to peer into windows of perception closed and darkened. At dusk, I see two pups playfully tussle like kittens, jump, prance, collide, and wrestle on the grass. It seems like joy, even though I know from fables to sipping cocktails at a pickup bar that foxes are only sly, vicious, cunning, sneaky, and sexy. It's hard to see Fox without a mirror, but I long for just an inkling of animal instinct to put into a painting, song, or poem. Fox souls are stolen by human attributes, leaving them less than they are so we can tell stories about ourselves. Well, there's a lot of beauty in nature, but sometimes we're fooled by beauty. Purple loosestrife may be a flower you're familiar with. In late August and even into September, it creates a beautiful magenta haze, almost like a fog of color in swamps. But it's an invasive plant, and it wipes out all sorts of native plant species and hurts a lot of wildlife that depend on those species. So, subversive flower. Against August's drowsy greenery, a magenta haze of loosestrife floods the river with waves of cool, delicious color that pools and settles in the swamps. A sea of flashing electric flower spires. Escape from its garden paradise, this pilgrim plant now devours the landscape with its relentless spread of seed and root. It suffocates wild rice, jewelweed, cattails, and bulrushes, leaving a sterile, radiant desert that evicts mallards and face-painted wood ducks, muskrats, marsh wrens, and long-legged bitterns. Seduced by blooms of subversive beauty, traffic slows for a look and camera click that captures the pretty, coveted postcard color. We're traffickers in images mesmerizing us like our own reflections, caught in the wetland waters where loosestrife blooms. One of the joys of my student days at the University of Massachusetts was hearing Richard Wilbur read once. I actually heard him a second time in a small room a year before he died, which was also wonderful. But back when I was about 20 years old, I heard him read, and I was just so taken by his gentle way, his perception, the way he organized words. And one poem that really struck me was the one about the toad that he hit with the lawnmower. And even after all those years and having written it down, you could tell the empathy that he had for this simple creature, and it stayed with me. Well, a similar thing happened to me just this summer. So, snake in the grass. Isolated in a halo of noise from the mower's roar, I spot a stick just ahead. As I pass, it jumps, squiggles like an eel caught on a fishing line. Surely a snake in the grass, but the treachery is mine. Staring with eyes become black beads of anger, he seems ready to lunge, mouth wide in fierce defiance, writhing yellow stripes and black olive and brown checkerboard scales shining like polished leather. I cut the engine, quiet descends with a thud. Despite Adam and Eve and Hollywood westerns, I'm stricken to have wounded a creature so beautiful and vibrant, lounging on a lawn as much his as it is mine. I think of Wilbur's poem about the toad, chewed and clipped of a leg, while he too mowed. As a college kid, I listened to his soft, sympathetic voice, still repenting the creature's death. Not badly hurt, just a tiny ruby dot bubbled along the flank. I carefully lift the squirming reptile to a spot in deep rhododendron shade, and when the lawn is done, he's gone. I'm going to just read two more, and I'm going to depart in this case from the theme of the night for one poem. This is a 9/11 poem, and it being the 20th anniversary, I can't help but read this poem. It's still September. And I was a volunteer firefighter for 26 years in my community, and I remember going to the firehouse that day after the events of the morning, and no one knew what to do with themselves. Every emotion you can imagine, from sadness to anger, was floating around, and like birds trying to find a perch that wasn't there. A few years later, or a couple of years later, I'm a big minor league baseball fan, and I went to see the Staten Island Yankees play. Their stadium is at the ferry dock, and it looks across the harbor at Manhattan. And shortly after that, I wrote this. It's called Extra Innings on Staten Island. At 90 miles an hour, Schaefer's fastball slams with a pop into the deep, leathery mouth of the catcher's mitt. The scent of grilling sausages hangs in summer's searing heat. Brooklyn's Bouchard grounds to shortstop, and cheers rise like smoke into the cloudless sky from this cozy concrete horseshoe of a stadium. Over the outfield wall, massive tankers and container ships carrying bright steel canisters pass as silently as icebergs along the Kilvan Cove. The harbor beyond is herringbone with white caps and busy with tugs pushing barges, and fishing trawlers with their nets reeled on deck. The boxy ferry crosses and recrosses past the Grand Green Lady as she stands sentry before the city's shimmering cliffs, its bases and buttes of masonry, its columns of glass and steel that are filing cabinets of humanity. But the twin towers of black, dark glass still haunt like the pain of an amputee's phantom limb. Anxiety spread like flu on that day when the sky was an azure arc in which a center fielder could lose a fly. We gathered around televisions repeatedly watching the cartoonish unreality of the plane, the explosion of flames and slowly coiling gray smoke. Fear-contorted faces filled streets darkened by the black rain of debris, bridges filled with pedestrians, tearful men and women held pictures of the missing. Jostled by catcalls and shouts, "I'm back with Lovett at the bat." On a hit and run, he puts the ball in play, allowing Brody to slide safely at third. Tie score, and I wonder if Brewer can execute the suicide squeeze. He's an unknown on a roster filled with untested names like Coelho, Nutcracky, and Gunnell. Any could be the next Ruth, whose legendary bat will lift a nation. But Brewer's caught looking on a pitch on the inside corner, and I get up to grab a sausage against the uncertainty of extra innings. Some years ago, long after I finished college, I was wandering one very cold January day through the greenhouses at Smith College, which are just beautiful. They're, those old-fashioned Victorian structures of glass. And it was then that, for some reason, although intellectually I understood it, emotionally I was hit with this notion of the fragility of our planet. This is called Glass House. Hunkered deep, every breath a strangled effort in January's icy squeeze, I duck into the greenhouse for a quick dip into summer. Smothered in womb soft humidity, muscles slacken, and my defrosted mind wanders a jungled riot of vegetable life, thick with soil scents and respiring plants. I could live forever in this indoor tropical island paradise of rubber plants, cacao trees, lacy ferns, and tendril grasping vines from the endless Augusts of Africa, Indonesia, and South America. Seduced by perpetual green, I've fallen for the alluring lips of glossy, crayon-colored orchids. Thin light penetrating this crystal tint pours from sky the color of frayed jeans. Flimsy glazing and furnaces gobbling fossil fuel keeps this artificial world refulgent and sodded with photosynthesis when periodic arctics press on the panes of a fragile fallacy. I know about people living in glass houses, an evaporating ozone layer, countless cars idling at stoplights, and my doctor's melanoma warnings. A lingering adolescence looks for a rock. Break glass in emergency, school alarms once instructed. Then I remember the cobwebby blue orb captured in Apollo 8's Earthrise, and imagine the greenhouse floating in space. Thank you.
That's Margaret's bio too. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I love not especially, but I love the last one about some of the sonic words were just really spectacular. So, our next poet, Margaret Gibson, has published 13 books of poems. Most recently, The Glass Globe, released just in August of this year. Other collections include Not Hearing the Wood Thrush, Broken Cup, which was a finalist for the 2016 Poets Prize, The Vigil, a poem in 4 voices, a finalist for the National Book Award, and Long Walks in the Afternoon, a Lamont poetry selection. These and several other of Margaret's poetry collections were published by the Louisiana State University Press. 2 other poetry collections, Icon and Evidence and Autumn Grasses, were finalists for the Connecticut Center for the Book Award in Poetry in 2002 and 2004. Margaret's memoir, The Prodigal Daughter, Reclaiming an Unfinished Childhood, was published by University of Missouri Press in 2008. The recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and 2 separate pushcart prizes, Ms. Gibson was named the Poet Laureate of Connecticut in 2019. With a grant from the Academy of American Poets, she recently edited an anthology, Waking Up to the Earth, Connecticut Poets in a Time of Global Climate Crisis, which is available at the back table. It's a wonderful collection. Margaret is Professor Emerita at the University of Connecticut and lives in Preston, Connecticut. Of her environmental writing, Ms. Gibson has written, "Now that the earth as we know it is in climate crisis, I am drawn, as are other poets, to write poems about endangered species, dramatic storms, famines, floods, plagues, cities sinking, and forest fires. But when environmental grief thrums and stirs me, I'm not restricted to writing elegy, nor to writing of the future's blighted earth on the way to or after the 6th extinction. The most valuable climate poems will also explore in language how to free ourselves from the illusion that we human beings are separate, rewriting our sense of what it means to see everything, including ourselves, as interrelated subjects, not objects, in a living flux and immediacy. It is my great honor to present Connecticut Poet Laureate Margaret Gibson. Really fascinated that this process is a little blue beanie on the. All right. I'm going to give all of this back to Barb.
Oh, thanks.
And thank you all for being here. And I will tell a little anecdote. There's a wonderful memoirist named Jeffrey Wolf who wrote a book called The Duke of Deception, and award-winning memoir. And he came to give a lecture at a place where I was teaching and told this story about a time that he read at the University of Connecticut. And he said there were 4 people in the audience. His wife, the person who had organized the reading, and one other person to whom he would be eternally grateful. Audiences can get smaller. You never know. Barb is a great organizer, and we'll have to blame the weather gods, I think, tonight. I am reading mostly these days from The Glass Globe, which didn't just come out this year. It came out at the end of August, so it's very, very new. It's a book, it is the 3rd book in a trilogy that began with Broken Cup, and the 2nd book, Not Hearing the Wood Thrush. These are all books that deal with my late husband's 11-year journey with Alzheimer's, for which, as you know, there is no cure. It's a very irrevocable disease. And in this particular book, The Glass Globe, which was there were poems that I was writing about the earth, and then David died at the end of 2017. And so, obviously, poems having to do with my personal bereavement, I began to write those poems. But personal bereavement, poems of personal bereavement then, and of environmental grief, are the poems that dominate this book and braid together. The quote that Barb read to you echoes my abiding concern that humans still amazingly think of some think of themselves as separate from the earth, when interconnection is really the law of poetry and the law of ecology and of most spiritual traditions. Alzheimer's has been called a long goodbye. And as you know, it's a process of subtraction, of loss after loss. Words, but also other cognitive functions and so on. It occurred to me, actually after the book was written, that another word, the long goodbye, also is, we might apply that phrase to global climate crisis. Because, well, the weather can be beautiful. I mean, it's getting more and more apparent that things are awry, but the loss and the progression is very, very slow, however inexorable it seems to be. So this book is bookended by 2 poems. It begins with one poem in which I'm washing my husband's body, also his children,
our son and our daughter were there with me shortly after he died. And I'm going to begin the reading with that poem, but I want you to know that the book ends with a poem I'm not going to read tonight, in which the speaker of the poem washes the body of the earth. And I'll talk a little bit about that toward the close of the evening, or close of the reading. I said in an essay that as human beings on this earth, we seem to have forgotten who we are. We magnify our existence and our wishes and our preferences and our way of life, and minimize that of so many others. We have forgotten who we are. It is a mistaken scale about how we see ourselves on the planet. I think, of course, the progression of forgetting in Alzheimer's sort of speaks for itself. But I'll begin with washing the body. Since we're a small group, it's very intimate reading, and I'll talk a little bit about intimacy as we go along, but this is a very intimate poem. There's nothing you can do, I think, as a caregiver. It's the last act of giving care, physical care that one can offer one's beloved, and there is an obvious intimacy to it. Washing the body. And last we washed his body. Last we rolled it to one side of the bed, rocked it gently back. The long length of him settled now onto a clean sheet. Last I followed a crease on his forehead with my finger. Last his daughter washed his hair, massaging his scalp, sloshing the soapy water. Last his son sponged his shoulders, and I, each finger, he had beautiful hands. Last his thighs, his knees, his shin blades. Last we washed his feet, their soles a smooth new silk. And I, for the last time, his genitals, still warm as a wood's earth nestle of wild orchid. His no breath now stayed sweet. Last, his eyebrows, bushy, outrageous, a fleck of water caught there bright in the lamplight as if a snowflake from a walk we took years back across a white field had freshly fallen. I don't know who crossed his arms across his chest. And last he was warm when I kissed a mouth that would not close, nor speak, nor allow us to enter the mystery of his being beyond us now, no crossing that threshold. And the silence in the room was, as it always is, ordinary and vast. Many of the poems in this book are round rather than linear, cycles and interconnections and so on. This is one of the rounder ones, and it too is it's a kind of an elegy before the elegy, I guess, called Because the Earth. Because the earth as we know it will end, I plant dahlias. And because dahlias will fade, in late fall I dig up their roots to make a potion that dyes my scarf of white silk, the color of the earth. And because the scarf will wear out and will shred, I untie it from around my neck, off it flies into the wind with the prayer flags. And because my neck will someday not be needed to hold up my head, I take down a recipe for stock, good bone broth, and because my head takes stock of each leaf as it settles onto the dark, shining surface of the pond, I reach for an invisible spool of red cord, knot the cord, and begin mending the net we've torn. This net made of air and ocean, made of sun and soil. At junctures woven into this net are jewels, whose each facet reflects star groves and owls, minnows and eelgrass, meadowlarks, milkweed, and monarchs, so that each apparently single thing exists in the light of everything else. And because the net also trembles as it senses the glacial erratic in any heart that just sits there and sits there and sits there, a mute lament. And because each of us has the power to turn harm into healing, and because the earth, as we know it, will end, just now I plant dahlias. How in the world do you approach a subject as large as the death of your beloved, or as large, even grander, large as the death of the planet? And you do it moment by moment. Washing the body was a moment. So is this poem. And please listen for the interconnection of the individual and the earth. Moment. I'm speaking to my dead husband. Moment. When your eyes suddenly opened, I brought my face closer and turned into breath and slid into your throat. Just as a sigh of out-breath, your last, carried you back to what you'd never left. Brooks and forests, rocks and deer trails, steep fields, stars, and the dark matter no one notices. And you became the impulse a wood thrush yields to, singing. Became once again the slow spread of moss and lichen on granite, once again the ancestors, men who blew on their hands in winter, women who pressed grapes into wine for communion and festival, children that play in the yard. And although time is an onslaught, we live equally in the in-breath of oceans and in the out-breath of mountains as they turn into ravines and valley and field. It is always just one moment we inhabit. Just so when we married, I crossed the room, I walked toward you, and you took my face into your hands, according to the ancient compact of earth and sun. And the original brightness of that moment is the original brightness of this. That day was this day, and we said yes. We said yes. David died on our wedding anniversary, 42 years, almost to the hour. But even if he hadn't, when you link your life with someone, you link your life and you also link everything, the moment of death included. Another moment, I'm alternating a bit between poems that have to do with personal grief and those that have to do with environmental grief. Another moment, it's kind of a silly one. It's nice that there's a mirror back here. I can't see what it reflects. But
The light.
it's probably not the afternoon. But anyway, there's a mirror in my bedroom, and I can't tell you how many countless times, I brush my hair, I put on an earring, I look in the ear, in the mirror. And one day I noticed that I wasn't alone in the mirror. There was at least half of the painting from the living room floating in the mirror also right next to my face, and I'd never noticed it before. It's a landscape painting, as you will hear as the poem goes on. Reflection looking straight ahead. This morning I have to confess mirrors confuse me, especially the small one over the dresser that faces the open bedroom door, so that all this while, years really, brushing my hair, choosing an earring, looking straight ahead, I haven't noticed that at least half of the painting over the sofa in the next room floats in the mirror. A field and sky at sundown right there, next face. I know that to look is one thing, to see another, that it's more than a matter of angle, focus, stance. But to think that all the while I've been leaning in close, the painting has been there, field and sky, and noticing them now, finally, I'm drawn to consider what else daily I live with and don't notice, afraid to, perhaps. As a child, I'd drift into wondering, what if, after the final conflagration, erasure, rapture, or roiling upheaval, what if only I survived? How then would I find food, or grow it, make a brick, understand gravity, list the elements, solve an equation, sketch an atom, hum the whole of Beethoven's Ninth, recall a wren? And why must I pare myself down to the last one left before I admit the fields and woods already are silent, as nearly silent as they are in the painting, only partially reflected in the mirror, where next to my face, summer field and horizon lie close. So close we share the same skin, the same sun already gone down gold behind dark cedars, leaving the sky lit. The immense painted sky drizzled with delicate black smatter, with tiny motes that fall on everything equally, and I didn't notice them before. I didn't see them until now here they are, falling into a mirror in which simply to see myself there rouses the question each breath of mine tries to conceal. Why must I die? Barb, I need to ask you how long the reading goes, because I don't know when we started.
I don't care.
You don't
You can
care?
take as
All
long
right.
as you want to.
So, okay, I'm going to read another poem that has to do with our earth. You know, I read this poem once to a group of poets that we do sort of peer critiquing of each other's poems, and people were saying, oh, I thought about all those monsters about, you know, movies about the end of the earth and monsters and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think about that at all. I think of what's going on right now. It doesn't seem. But anyway, the poem is called Never Pitiless Enough or Kind. And it kind of refers to a voice that I keep hearing. It's a voice that is somehow able to combine reprimand and a kind of pitilessly factual look at the way things are, with compassion or a kind of kindness. And that voice is speaking in this poem, and it's speaking to you, me, or to each of you. Never pitiless enough or kind. Nothing now you can do about it. You will be torn from your bed, or you will rise from the bare floor of the shopping mall, from the factory's concrete, from the dirt road where your car has stalled, and you will run. You will flee in a panic, following the last of the birds to the shore, to the sea, where you hope to escape the flames, the explosions, the burning ash. Your whole life, haven't you known it would come to this? However you sought to shield yourself, sheltering in the family and its things, sheltering if you were poor in whatever was left of your dignity, your eyes were never pitiless enough or kind enough. Your attention was scattershot. You never focused on the great matter, which now has ripened unavoidably. Ah, my dear, you never understood. Perhaps now, as you rise out of what's left of your body, you may remember how once, only a child, you held in both your hands a tiny replica of the globe, a manufactured manufactured tin orb, tinted azure for oceans, and for the continent's bold territorial colors. It was a toy, that replica. Not the self-creating, self-sustaining earth that has the power, beginning with a single cell, to make from implicate intelligence your lush, evolving curiosity. Even so, you had only to hold it out on your palm, as if it were the last apple or the first flower. And what did you do? Ah, my dear, you did this. After I read that poem, I usually like to return to a familiar plot of earth. So I'm not going to read that familiar plot, I'm going to read this one. Partly to remind this, I hope that this book breaks your heart. I hope it reminds of whatever particular plot of this earth you love. And in the book also are some pretty stark images of how things might turn out if we don't catch this runaway monster and change our lives and change the fate of the earth. This is a poem called 1 Hour, and I live a third of a mile back a dirt road in the woods in Preston, Connecticut. I'm surrounded by land trust land. I've been on the board of a local land trust there for over 35 or 40 years. There's a pond there, and it's a place where David and I lived for many years. So that's the beloved plot of earth that you'll be hearing about. We felt very intimately placed on this earth, living in that spot. The poem has an epigraph. I'll tell you a joke in a minute. It's not a fun one, but I'll tell you in a minute. It has an epigraph by Stephen Levine, an author who's written a lot about death and dying, and this is a quote from one of his books. I don't remember which one. Here's what he says. If you had 1 hour to live and could make only one phone call, who would it be to? What would you say? And why are you waiting? The poem is called 1 Hour. Night, and I come up the hill toward the house, away from the pond where the tree frogs are singing. Otherwise it's quiet. And before I reach the yellow rectangular slabs of light which the house windows, lit from within, cast onto the dark grass, I turn and look up at the stars. I know where I am as accurately as any astronomer who plots the position of Deneb, that lighthouse up there, unreachable but for the delay of light. One need only track the prepositions I use to pinpoint where, according to the graph in my mind, I am, but I have no idea where you are, my displaced beloved. Perhaps that's why I turn myself around and around, turning the way the tilting earth, shelterless in the night sky, turns. I suppose there's an aerial vantage point from which the earth is visibly whole. For me, the view is limited to Oak Rim, Pond, Hill, this place, where if I had only 1 hour left, I wouldn't know in what direction to call your name. Oh, I don't know where soon enough I will be going, only where I am now. And for that great gift I bow down. I bow down to this darkened plot of earth you in particular loved, and on which we stayed awake together the whole of one night, inside by the kitchen window where we watched a lunar eclipse. And what did it matter we could see only the shadow of the earth's rim, then the earth, sliding gradually, partially, across the moon. You said, ever so gently, it's good to be here and with you. So, in this poem is again, the pairing of what I'm trying to do over and over in this book. An individual life, an individual relationship, but always the shadow of the earth crossing the moon. Always an awareness that the planet is our home. And that we live intimate, that the best way to live on it, and the best way to live with another human being is intimately. I practice Zen Buddhism, and in Zen, the word intimate doesn't mean necessarily, and it doesn't, as I'm thinking of it in the poem either, have to do with, I don't know, things you don't tell anybody, bedroom things. It has to do with a kind of dropping of the veil between yourself and someone else or something else. It has to do with not feeling other, not feeling outside. It has to do with intermeshing borders and boundaries. I love Rilke's definition of two people who are in love or married or committed to each other. It is two solitudes who border and protect each other. So that kind of intimacy. But there's nobody else in this poem but me, and I'm outside. Again, where I live. At the rim of the pond, there's a slim blowdown, a sapling pitched over by a rainstorm that shattered any surface reflection. It leafed out anyway, and its flowers, small as dust motes, smell of nutmeg, married to the whiff of a memory I can't quite place. Never mind its being pitched into the pond. It's tethered by the rescue lines of two slim roots that burrow into the muck, so that the tree continues to feed on the dark underneath of mess and rot and ruin to which its own falling petals contribute. Today I stood beside it, at the edge of pond water pumping with pollywogs and swift blue black dragonflies, no longer wondering if I had rope enough and muscle enough to pull it out. No longer thinking I was so still, a billow of smoky pollen from the pines blew through me, and a water snake poked its shiny black head through last year's sallow reeds, and after I don't know how long, when I looked up overhead, wings outstretched, a red-tailed hawk, circle by circle, was being carried on a thermal up, and so tenderly, far beyond any conclusion I know how to make. Okay, two more. They're a little long, but they're major poems in the book, actually. One is the title poem, Glass Globe. When I was growing up, as a little kid, my aunt in Virginia had this big glass globe. It was hand blown. I do exaggerate, it wasn't quite that. And hand blown glass globe, and she had a candle inside it, and it just took my breath away every time I saw it when we were at my Aunt Mimi's house. And lucky me, the glass globe came to me after she died. And I wrote about it in an essay years ago, and this poem quotes that essay, a long passage from it, breaks it into lines in the beginning, description. You'll hear that, I'll do this, quotation marks. And it's glass, and it's a globe, and obviously it's reminiscent of the shape of the earth, and that becomes more and more obvious as the poem goes on. It's round not just because the shape of the earth, the shape of the globe. You'll see why. The glass globe. Wanting to begin again, a form of denial, I copy from a book, rearranging the words with a shaking hand. This morning from where I sit, the rug is dark blue and burgundy, brighter where a length of full sun from the east window falls. On the shelf of the bay window, a large glass globe, hand-blown, the color of air over the shallows of the Sound summer mornings, shimmers. It all but floats. This morning, glad of it, I'm not going anywhere, content as the globe fills with the quiet simplicity of light. This glass globe, it's a made thing, a synthesis of sand and fire, air and muscle, lung and tool, a flaring of energies joined and transformed, and because of the quality of attention that went into it, beautiful. And it rests in a precarious place. I have to move it as I open the windows. I shift it when I dust. And if I'm not careful, my mood hard and angular, I may knock against it. And this is history. This is prose, my prose, words in a book now out of print, words underlined by my husband whose hand now is ash in a wood-fired ceramic jar. Except for me, everyone who came to our wedding is dead. I'm in another house now. The glass globe rests in another morning's light. Each morning, I walk out of this house to stand alone in the quiet of these woods, whose leaf-rumpled earth so long ago now was cleared and planted, grazed, hayed, harvested, abandoned. Before that, scraped clean by the sharp edge of the glacier. Before that, marsh and sediment. Before that, shoal and sea depth. Before that, stone. When I take my shoes off, my bare feet touch granite that was here before leafy decay and woods earth formed. Now I stand on it shaken. I've done it. The fault is mine. I remember a Chinese sage holding up a ceramic bowl, smaller than the globe in my window, but beautiful, therefore the same. Everything that partakes of beauty is the same. And this gentlest of sages smiled as he said, the bowl is already broken. And he meant, live with it that way. Love it crazed and cracked. Love it broken, because everything already is broken. And was it moments ago, dusting, I lifted the glass globe, and when, even gently, I set it down, it cracked. Despite generations of care and abuse, it cracked. Now 2 fault lines rising from the base nearly to the lip. And here's the crazy miracle. It holds. It still holds. But do the math, estimate probability, run the numbers, then stand here, bare feet on broad granite, from which a whispered certainty, we're done for, rises razor thin through flesh and bone, then lodges a splinter of glass in my throat. So that is a sort of intimate warning. And I'm going to read a poem called Exchange. The Glass Globe is a standalone poem in this book, as is Washing the Body, and is this poem called Exchange. This poem in particular works with interconnection, our interdependency, the interdependency of all beings on this earth. But of course, it begins with focus on my loss. My late husband was a writer, and one of the things I was gradually able to bear to do was to go through his manuscripts, in particular the ones that he had left unfinished. So the poem begins with that. I think It's a long poem, but I think you can follow it. Listen up for a letter that his daughter found in the basement and read to me over the telephone, and the various ways that the word exchange is used in the poem. Exchange. We exchange letters, for instance. We exchange oxygen and CO2 with trees, for instance. Yeah. Exchange, a letter to David. Now that you've entered the great silence, I search out your scribbled notes and drafts, the remains of your work in progress. Each word I say aloud, drawing each one into my body as if body were a vault for treasure. A word you used to say with a long A. Treasure, pleasure, measure. I echo your odd torque of the vowel. Had your luck been otherwise, those words would have been forged by you into memoir and genealogy, your life a well-made volume of breath. And so I gather the scraps piece by piece, I try to finish your sentences, I forage through files and boxes, I nose about for treasure as do the midwinter deer outside. In a year the oaks put out a few acorns. I'd eat the bark off a pine if I thought I'd find beneath its tight, inscrutable cover a trace of your voice. I want to get through winter too. I'm simply an animal who feeds on words, finding yours spilling into margins, balanced steeply on underlinings, many more crossed out in your rough-hewn drafts. I savor the words, listening for your voice in a continuous, if tenuous, exchange. I see it everywhere, exchange. Nothing's finished. I breathe out carbon dioxide, the summer oaks take it in along with the sun, the leaves power up, unfurl more leaves, give out oxygen, those doubled molecules I breathe in without thinking much about it. But for an occasional burst of gratitude, the sheer luck of being alive. Sheer. A word so transparent it might house spirit. The spirit, I'd say, if I could make out what it is. Up late, we'd often talk for hours about a single word, a spirited exchange. Who knew where it would take us? And words kept us close. But Shear's partner is stark, and together they make and unmake, treasure, pleasure, measure. What stays? Firewood is a moment of being time. Ash also. Being time, we are like the shavings that curled from the oak you planed into planks to frame this house and lay the floors. Being time, we are whatever it is in us arises, meets, and merges into everything else. Over the phone last night, your daughter read me a letter you'd written her, found tucked away in an old cardboard box in the basement. Its subject, how many can we invite to the wedding? A question of some urgency back then, a time of treasure, pleasure, measure. Hungrily, I listened to your words in her voice, gentle words and wise, as you traced in an eloquent narrative your passage in time through hardship to an exchange of love no numbers can tally. That was a moment. That was a meeting. Perhaps a life's work is just this moment, just this much, breath shaped and released, given freely into the clear air. How many can we invite to the wedding? All of it is wedding. An exchange of words in sunlight, a moment of bud and blossom begun in a rustle of leaves, a never-before-now utterance, suspended in sheer daring, the words shining, briefly held by who knows what, before being swept once more, syllable by syllable, vowel by vowel, beyond the passion to endure, beyond the passion not to be lonely, beyond, into the full and everlasting furl of silence. Remember of that sort in silence, ordinary and vast. It's in this room too. I said I would just not read, but say a few words about irrevocable. I was thinking one day, you know, it's easier to measure the loss of your beloved. How in the world do you get the death of the earth and the possible global climate crisis? How do you hold it in your mind? I think one of the reasons people find it so easy to either deny it or to pretend to be indifferent to it is because they can't do it. The implications are just too large, which is why it's so important to have facts and daily acts and reminders of what we can do to change our lives, and I thank you for that. I thank all of us for that. But I was thinking, how do you bring it home to people what the loss of the earth is like? My friend Chase Twitchell, and I said this in the introduction to Waking Up to the Earth, my friend Chase Twitchell, who's a wonderful poet, said in a poem of hers, you know, that she knows there will be another form of life on this earth, but she loves this one. Yeah. And that's the point, to love this one. So I thought, well, how do you make people love this one? Not just the natural beauty of the earth and other creatures, and the trees and the oceans and everything else, but what we've contributed to it too. Second nature, Waldo Emerson said, is called art second nature. We are co-creators with the earth. So I thought, well, I don't know how to do it. And then I thought, I mean, it's easy by comparison to bathe the body of your just momentarily deceased husband. And then I thought, well, maybe you do the same thing. Maybe you bathe the body of the earth. Maybe you just wash it. And as you enumerate, like, you know, shin, thigh bone, feet, etc., as you enumerate the things on this earth, washing them, the poem, one thing by another, interconnects and creates a kind of portrait of life as we know it, at any rate, on this earth. And it's called irrevocable, but I hope it's not. So, thank you for being here. Thank you, David, for your wonderful poems. For Grace, thank you for having us here. And if you've heard one or two words that matter to you tonight, take them, mix them with your own breath, go out and speak to others about how much you love this earth and how, this is my mantra now, each other, this earth, each other, this earth. I give them to you. Thanks for being here. Two really brilliant readings. Thank you, David and Margaret. Holy cow. For people who are watching through Facebook or who will watch a recording of it, I'm also going to post the names of the poets' works too, and hopefully you'll support them in terms of purchasing their books. We certainly have enjoyed and had a wealth of wonderful poetry tonight. So this was our last reading for the season. Everyone keep reading and writing poetry and loving poetry, and thank you for coming.